Hi guys, so we're going to talk about substance use disorders this week, and so we're just going to jump in. One of the first things that I want to talk about that I think it's important to talk about is some changes, important changes that occurred when we transitioned to DSM-5 a number of years ago. But I think a lot of people still, in everyday life, think about the old categories that we had, and the changes are important. So I want to point those out, and when we have live class, talk a little bit about that. So the old categories that people are really familiar with talk about whether you get diagnosed with substance abuse or substance dependence, or not, neither, obviously. But they've been combined to a single substance use disorder diagnosis for all substances. And so it's a really important distinction because it used to be that you'd have conversations with clients where they would insist that they could stop if they wanted to. They would insist that it wasn't, that they weren't abusing it, that they were just using it. And now the issue is not whether and how, even how much you're using. It's about what effect the substance is having on your life. And that becomes the main point of diagnosis. And I just want to show you, hang on a sec, I just want to show you the criteria here. All right, so here's our alcohol use disorder diagnosis. And these criteria are going to be the same for all diagnoses. So you guys, right, you have access to this DSM library on our online databases. So make sure that you take a look at those. But we're going to use alcohol use disorder just as an example. And so, right, a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress as manifested by at least two of the following in the last year. So we only need two. So we don't need to have, more than two, although many people will have more than two. And let's look at the criteria. Alcohol is often taken in larger amounts or over a longer period than intended. There's a persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down. A great deal of time spent in activities necessary to obtain, use, or recover. So if you're recovering from hangovers a lot, that counts, right? Craving or strong desire to use, recurrent use, resulting in failure of major role obligations. So you can't get your schoolwork done, you can't get to work, you're calling out sick from work, or things are happening at home that you're not engaged in because of alcohol, either that you're out getting it, you're actually using it, or you're recovering. And that recovery is an important distinction. Continued use of alcohol despite social or interpersonal problems, right? So this is people don't want to hang out with you, people are angry with you, things of that nature. Important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of alcohol. And so, right, jobs, time with friends, relationships, so it's a little bit repetitive to some other stuff, but we list it separately. Recurrent alcohol use in situations in which it's physically hazardous, and so the most common choice here that's going to meet that is going to be DUIs, but there's other things as well. Continued use despite persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problems known to have been caused or exacerbated or likely to have been caused or exacerbated. So your doctor tells you that your liver function tests don't look good, or other medical tests don't look good, or your psychologist, your therapist tells you that alcohol is worsening your depression, and you continue drinking anyway. And then tolerance is one of the possibilities, right? And withdrawal is another possibility, but you don't need to have either one of those to have the diagnosis. And so we can see that there, right? So let's go back to our PowerPoint slides. Right, so you can see that what we're talking about here is, does this interfere in your life? That is what each of those criteria get at, as opposed to, are you using this in a way that's different from other people, right? You might be drinking at the same level as lots of other people you know, but it's interfering in your life and not interfering in their life, and then you would meet criteria and they would not. One of the other things, let me just go back here for a second. One of the other things that we've tried to get away from is how subjective the old criteria were. And you'll see some of the criteria we just looked at are still fairly subjective, but we've tried, the DSM has tried to make them more objective, so that you could point to factual information, right, instead of just some sense of whether the drinking was problematic or not. The other thing we're going to talk about a lot here, and you guys have case studies to look at that gets at this is the stigma that these diagnoses often carry with them. And we've talked about stigma before in more general ways of psychological disorders. But in these cases, these disorders are often seen differently by the general population than all of the other disorders we have and we'll talk about. People tend to be more blaming and less sympathetic about people who meet criteria for substance use disorders. And I think the biggest reason for that we can talk about more when we're together is that this is seen as choices, and I think it's particularly problematic when so many of us do make the choice to use substances, right? So many of us certainly drink alcohol. I'm willing to bet a number of you make choices to use other substances. And if you don't run into problems with it, then it's easy to see that, it's easy to believe that you made a choice to use it in a responsible way, while others are making a choice to use it less responsibly. And that they must also have the same choices as you do. And when we talk about etiology, we'll challenge that idea a bit. But I want you, as you're reading those case studies and as you're thinking about the substance use disorders in more general ways this week, I want you to be thinking about what your own preconceived notions are and what your own just kind of emotional reactions are, even if they're not your logical reactions. So we did look at the DSM criteria, so we don't need to do that. One of the things to think about is the fact that just because somebody meets a substance use disorder set of criteria now, doesn't mean that they always will. And the best example of that is college students, that many college students would meet criteria for an alcohol use disorder and maybe even cannabis use disorder or even other things. But alcohol certainly when they're in school, especially if they're living on a residential campus. And that most of them, vast majority of them, will stop meeting criteria the moment they leave their campus. That the context makes it more normative to engage in what would outside of the college feel like substance use disorders criteria. However, it's important to know that once that pattern starts for some of them, they're not going to be able to start and they might have lifelong problems. So we're going to pause there. We'll do etiology in the next in the next lecture video.